The first time I realized something was seriously wrong, it wasn't because of Emily's phone habits or her late nights out. No, it started with our daughters Emma and Chloe whispering. Two little girls who used to tell me everything suddenly had secrets. I noticed it one Saturday morning when I overheard them talking in their room, their voices hushed like they were guarding something precious. My girls, who could never keep quiet about anything, were now making sure I didn't hear a single word. And when I walked in, they snapped their heads towards me, wide-eyed, and went quiet in an instant. I laughed it off at the time, thinking maybe they were planning a surprise or something innocent like that. But that was my first mistake, dismissing the little things. Then there was the day Emily came back from yoga. She had been going religiously for weeks, suddenly obsessed with finding her center or whatever she called it. That evening, though, her hair was done, makeup flawless, and she was wearing a new dress. Not exactly the sweaty post-workout look I expected. The girls were acting strange too, giggling with each other like they shared some inside joke, shooting glances at their mother as if they knew something I didn't. I didn't say anything that night. I let it slide, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that had been growing in the pit of my stomach. But Emily didn't come to bed. She stayed downstairs, said she had some work to finish up. That's when I heard her voice, faint but there, coming from the living room. I crept down the stairs, half curious, half suspicious, and what I saw shook me in a way I wasn't ready for. Emily was on the phone, talking low, her voice sweet in a way that made my blood run cold. She wasn't talking to her sister, her mom, or any of the usual people. She was talking to him. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow. No, the girls are coming with me this time. They love you." My heart pounded so loud in my ears that I thought she might hear it. I froze there, standing in the shadows of the staircase, as she casually talked about our daughters like it was nothing. She was taking them with her to see some man, her lover, and they knew. Our daughters knew. I felt something break inside me. That wasn't just betrayal. That was a whole different level of deception. Something twisted and ugly that I hadn't even imagined. The woman I had trusted, the mother of my children, was not only sneaking around behind my back but bringing our girls into it like it was some normal family outing. I didn't confront her then. Couldn't. I was frozen, trying to make sense of what I had just heard. My mind was racing. Everything in our marriage starting to unravel in front of me like a thread being pulled from a sweater. How long had this been going on? How could she do this, to them, to us? I went back upstairs, laid down, and stared at the ceiling, waiting for the weight of it all to crush me. But something else rose instead, an icy, calculated calm. This wasn't just about Emily's lies anymore. This was something darker, and I wasn't about to sit by and let her twist our kids into it. That night, I decided to play her game, but I was going to win. The next morning, everything felt surreal. Emily was in the kitchen, smiling like nothing had happened, pouring cereal for the girls. Emma and Chloe sat there, laughing and chatting, not a care in the world. Watching them, it was like I was seeing my life through a distorted lens. The woman I married was standing right in front of me, but I felt like I didn't know her at all. Worse than that, I didn't know what kind of secrets she had shared with our daughters. I played along. I smiled, kissed Emily on the cheek, and went through the motions. But inside, I was boiling. My every word was measured, my movements controlled, like I was an actor playing a part. It was hard, so hard, not to let the rage I felt spill out. But I knew I couldn't afford to tip her off just yet. I needed more. Emily told me she was taking the girls to some kids' yoga thing that day. I nodded, pretending I believed her. But I already knew what was really happening. My wife wasn't going to yoga. She was taking my daughters to see him, and that was the part that killed me the most. She was dragging them into her mess, making them complicit, and they were too young to even understand what was going on. They were being groomed to accept her lies as normal. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched coffee in front of me. I had to know who this man was. I had to see him for myself, face to face. My hands were shaking, but I had never felt so clear-headed. I opened Emily's laptop, hoping to find something, anything that would lead me to him. I know how that sounds, snooping through her stuff like a paranoid maniac. But at this point, all trust had been shattered. Privacy, respect, she'd already blown that apart. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. She wasn't as careful as she thought. Buried in her email were reservations for a lunch date with D, some expensive place about an hour outside of town. He had even sent her a message the night before, confirming the time. "Can't wait to see you and the girls. They're so sweet. I've missed them." I almost threw up. This wasn't just a fling. This guy had been around long enough to know my daughters. He was comfortable with them. And the girls? They liked him. The thought of another man sitting across from them, smiling, acting like he was part of our family, made me sick to my core. I wasn't about to sit at home while my wife paraded my daughters in front of her lover like some twisted family reunion. So, I grabbed my keys, jumped in the car, and started driving. I knew where they were going to be. I knew what I had to do. The restaurant was in one of those small, scenic towns where people go to pretend life is perfect. Couples strolled hand in hand. Families shared ice cream on the sidewalk. And there, at the far end of the outdoor patio, I saw them. Emily, laughing, carefree. Her hand resting on the arm of a man I had never seen before in my life. He looked about my age, maybe a little younger. Clean-cut, well-dressed, the kind of guy who probably thought he could do no wrong. Emma and Chloe were on either side of him, chatting like they'd known him for years. He was smiling, offering them bites of dessert like he was their dad. My pulse pounded in my ears. I parked the car and walked up slowly, forcing myself to breathe, to keep it together. Every step felt like a lifetime, my vision tunneling on that table, on them, completely unaware that their world was about to implode. I stopped right in front of them, casting a shadow over their perfect little scene. Emily's eyes widened as she looked up, the color draining from her face. She didn't even have time to speak before I asked. My voice calm but ice cold. "Who the hell is he?" The girls froze, their happy chatter turning into a confused silence. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not expecting me to show up. Emily opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. I wasn't about to make this easy for her. "Don't worry, girls," I said, turning to Emma and Chloe. "I just need to have a quick chat with Mommy and her friend here. Why don't you go play inside for a bit?" They hesitated, looking between me and Emily. But eventually, they slid off their chairs and disappeared inside the restaurant, still confused but obedient. Once they were out of sight, I turned back to Emily and her mystery man. "So," I said, my voice low, barely controlled. "You want to explain this? Or should I?" The man stood up, trying to act calm, like this wasn't a big deal. "I think we should all just sit down and talk. I don't give a damn what you think," I snapped, my gaze burning into him. "You're sitting at a table with my wife and my daughters. You don't get a say here." Emily finally found her voice, but it was shaky. "Look, I can explain." "Explain? You brought our kids into this, Emily. How do you even begin to explain that?" She didn't answer, her eyes flicking between me and the man, searching for an escape. But there was no way out now. Emily sat there, her hands clenched into fists on the table, eyes darting between me and her lover like she was calculating her next move. But no amount of calculation was going to save her from this. I wasn't letting her slip out of this one. I could see her trying to find the right words, but I wasn't interested in hearing more lies. The guy, though, he was different. He looked nervous, but there was something smug beneath it, like he wasn't worried, like he thought he had some upper hand. Maybe he thought he was better than me, or maybe Emily had filled his head with stories about how unhappy she was. Whatever it was, I could see it in the way he stood there, shifting but still steady, as if he wasn't the one who had just been caught with another man's wife and kids. "Who the hell is he, Emily?" I repeated, louder this time, not even looking at her. I was staring him down, daring him to open his mouth again. Emily exhaled sharply, then finally spoke. "This is Daniel. He's a friend, Mark." I let out a short laugh, more of a bark. "Really? A friend? Of course." That was the best she could come up with? A friend? Is that what you're calling him now? You bring our daughters to lunch with your friend? You lie to me for months, take them along, and you expect me to believe this is some casual thing? She shifted in her seat, her face hardening. This was it. This was the moment where the truth had nowhere left to hide. But instead of apologizing, instead of showing an ounce of regret, she did the one thing I didn't expect. She doubled down. Mark, stop being so dramatic. The girls love him, okay? He's been good to them. They're happy. I know this is a lot for you, but this isn't just about you anymore. It's not what you think. Not what I think. Those 4 words hit me harder than a punch to the gut. How dare she act like I was overreacting? Like I was the crazy one for not accepting this twisted little situation she had created. You've been bringing them to see him? I asked, my voice quieter now, dangerously so. All this time, she didn't flinch. Yes, and they're fine with it. Honestly, they've been better than ever. You've been so wrapped up in your own world, you didn't even notice. That hit me like a freight train. She was turning it around on me now, making it seem like this was all somehow my fault, that I had been neglecting my daughters, and that's why they'd accepted Daniel so easily. As if I'd been so blind that I missed the fact she'd been pulling them into her affair right under my nose. I couldn't take my eyes off her. This wasn't the Emily I thought I knew. The person sitting across from me wasn't just a cheater. She was a manipulator, a liar, someone who had rewritten the story in her head to make herself the victim, or at least not the villain. I felt my blood boiling, but I didn't want to lose it in front of him. I wasn't going to give Daniel the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. You think this is okay? I asked, locking eyes with her. You think this is something you can just sweep under the rug because you think the girls are fine with it? She crossed her arms and leaned back, her posture defiant now. They're not just fine with it. They're happier, Mark. Happier than they've been in a long time. They know we've had problems and, oh, don't even start with that. Problems? Problems don't justify dragging our kids into your mess. Emily, you're really gonna sit there and act like this is some kind of solution? Daniel finally decided to open his mouth again, like he had something important to contribute. Look, man, I get that you're upset. I snapped my head toward him. Shut up. You don't get it. You're sitting here, pretending you're some kind of savior. You're nothing but a coward, hiding behind my wife and kids, playing house with another man's family. His face twitched, but he didn't say anything after that. He knew better. Emily was seething now, her eyes narrowing as she leaned forward. You're not making this easier, Mark. We haven't been happy for years. You know that. I've tried to talk to you. I've tried to make it work, but what, Emily? Worked? Took care of our daughters? Tried to keep this family together while you were out playing around with this guy. Her silence was all the answer I needed. You could have left. You could have told me you were done. But no, you had to drag Emma and Chloe into it. You had to take them along like they're part of this circus. You used them to cover your tracks. And now you're gonna sit here and act like it's all because we had problems. The words hung in the air, heavy and tense. She didn't have an answer for that, at least not one she was ready to admit. I stood up slowly, the chair scraping loudly against the concrete patio. This isn't over, I said, looking down at her. You think this is just about us? No, you made this about them. You crossed a line, Emily, and there's no going back. I turned and walked away, leaving them both at the table, their little fantasy crumbling around them. I could hear Emily calling my name, but I didn't stop, couldn't, because the next steps weren't about saving our marriage. They were about protecting my daughters from the mess their mother had pulled them into. And I knew, in that moment, that the fight was only just beginning. I left the restaurant with my mind racing. The image of Emily and that man sitting with my daughters burning in my head. The reality of it was far worse than anything I could have imagined. Emily wasn't just cheating. She had built some twisted double life. Worse, she had made Emma and Chloe a part of it. The shock of it all was still sinking in, but rage was bubbling beneath the surface, fierce and unrelenting. When I got home, I was restless. I paced the living room, thinking about my next move. There was no way I could just let this go, not after what I'd seen. Emily had dragged the girls into this mess, and for that she was going to pay. I wasn't sure how, not yet, but there was no way I was letting her walk away from this unscathed. I wanted revenge, but not the kind that would ruin me or hurt my daughters. No, I had to be smart. If I was going to come out of this on top, I had to play it right. Hours passed. I couldn't stop replaying the scene at the restaurant in my head. Emily laughing, touching him like I didn't exist. The girls giggling with some stranger, completely unaware that their world was about to fall apart. The betrayal felt like poison coursing through my veins, and I couldn't sit with it any longer. When Emily and the girls finally came home, the tension in the air was thick. The girls ran past me without a word, heading upstairs to their room, blissfully unaware of what had gone down between their parents. But Emily, she stood in the doorway, her expression a mix of frustration and guilt. I could see it in her eyes. She knew she couldn't keep lying anymore, not after I'd caught her in the act. She shut the door softly and walked into the living room, crossing her arms defensively. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low, like she was the one holding all the cards. I stared at her for a long moment, not moving, not blinking. "Talk? Now you want to talk?" "Yes, now. What happened today can't keep happening. This mess is tearing everything apart." I almost laughed at the absurdity of her words. This mess? The nerve she had to call it a mess, as if it was something minor, something we could just sweep under the rug. "This mess," I said slowly, "is your fault, Emily. You made the decision to cheat. You made the decision to bring our daughters into it. Now you want to talk like we can fix this? You've lost your mind." She narrowed her eyes. "I wasn't happy, Mark. For years I wasn't happy. You knew that and you ignored it. You worked all the time, and when you were home, you were distant. You didn't even try to make things better. That's your excuse?" I snapped. "Because we had rough patches? You thought it was okay to go behind my back and introduce another man to our kids?" Her voice rose, defensive and bitter. "I didn't want it to happen like this, okay? But you didn't leave me any choice. I needed someone, and the girls, they needed to see me happy. You're lying to yourself if you think they don't know something's wrong," I said coldly. "You've turned our kids into pawns in your game, Emily, and you're not even sorry." She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "What's worse is that they've been covering for you. They've been lying to me, Emily. They're kids, and you've made them lie to their own father." Her face twisted, but she didn't deny it. Of course she didn't. She knew the girls had been in on it. Maybe not knowingly, but she'd used them all the same. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to win this argument to justify what she'd done, but deep down, she knew she was wrong. Still, that didn't stop her from trying. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking now. "Daniel's not just some fling. He's good for the girls. He's good for me. This isn't just about us anymore. They've bonded with him, and it's not fair to them to rip that away." I felt my whole body tense, my fists clenching at my sides. "You think I give a damn about what's fair to him? He's nobody to them, Emily. Nobody. You've poisoned their minds, made them think this is normal. They don't even know what's happening, and you've put them in the middle of your affair like it's some family day out." She blinked, stunned into silence. For the first time, it seemed like my words were cutting through her delusion. But that was only for a moment. Then she straightened up, her expression hardening again. "So what now?" she spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You want a divorce? Fine. You want to destroy everything? Go ahead. But don't think for a second you'll get the girls. They're better off with me. You've been so wrapped up in your own world that you didn't even notice they've grown distant from you. You don't know them like I do." I stepped closer, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. She was threatening me. She was going to try to take my daughters from me, like she hadn't already done enough damage. I knew then that this wasn't just about her affair anymore. She was going to fight dirty, and if I didn't act fast, she'd take the girls and twist them against me. "I'm not letting you win this, Emily," I said quietly, my voice steady but filled with the promise of war. "You've already lost everything, but you just don't know it yet." She glared at me, her jaw tight, but she didn't respond. The tension hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating, as if the entire house was holding its breath. I turned away, walking toward the stairs. "We'll talk about this tomorrow," I said over my shoulder, not bothering to look back at her. "I'm not letting you take them down with you. Not a chance." As I walked up the stairs, I heard her let out a sharp breath, the sound of her frustration ringing in my ears. She thought she was still in control. She thought this was just another fight she could win. But she had no idea what was coming next. I wasn't going to let her destroy our family any more than she already had. She'd made the mistake of pulling our daughters into her mess. Now I was going to make sure she paid for it, one way or another. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's smug face, Daniel's arrogant smirk, and my daughters caught in the middle, laughing along with a man who didn't belong in their lives. The weight of it all was crushing, but beneath that pressure, something was growing inside me. A plan. I had to be smart. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. Emily had made it clear that she was willing to play dirty, to turn the girls against me, to try and paint me as the distant, uninvolved father. Couldn't let her win. If I reacted out of anger, I'd be the one who looked irrational, and she'd have all the leverage. No, I had to stay calm, keep my emotions in check, and hit her where it hurt the most, her control over the situation. The next morning, I woke up early, before Emily or the girls were even stirring. I went downstairs and brewed a pot of coffee, my mind already running through everything I needed to do. First, I had to gather evidence. I knew Emily wasn't careful, and I was counting on that. The email reservations I'd found were just the tip of the iceberg. I was sure there was more. I started with her phone. It was charging in the kitchen, left out like she didn't expect me to go near it. I unlocked it. She hadn't even bothered to change the passcode, and began scrolling. Texts, emails, photos. It was all there. Every conversation with Daniel, every sneaky plan to meet up, every sweet, disgusting message about how much he loved our daughters. I took screenshots of everything, sent them to my own email, and deleted the evidence of the transfer. There were even messages from the girls, short, innocent texts about how much fun they had with Uncle Daniel. The fact that Emily had let them think of him like that made my stomach turn. She had woven him into their lives like he was family, and I had no idea how long this had been going on. After I finished with her phone, I went upstairs to my home office. I started printing everything, every damning piece of proof I could find. I was building my case brick by brick. By the time I was done, I had a stack of papers that painted a pretty clear picture of what had been happening behind my back. But that wasn't enough. I needed leverage, something that would leave her no choice but to step back and let me take control. Emily didn't just want Daniel. She wanted the narrative. She wanted to come out of this looking like the victim, the struggling wife who had to find happiness elsewhere because her husband was too busy, too distant, too distracted. I could already see how she was going to spin it, to the girls, to her friends, to the court if it came to that. But I had the truth, and I wasn't going to let her distort it. The next step was talking to a lawyer. I wasn't ready to file for divorce. Not yet, but I needed to know what my options were. I made the call later that day, once Emily had taken the girls to school. I found a lawyer who specialized in high-conflict divorces and custody battles. Her name was Sarah, and she didn't waste any time sugarcoating things. "Your wife has been using your daughters to build a bond with her lover," Sarah said bluntly after I laid out the situation. "That's going to hurt you in court if you don't act fast. Judges tend to prioritize stability for the kids. If your daughters have gotten close to this man, and if your wife can prove that you've been distant, it's going to be an uphill battle." "I'm not distant," I snapped. "She's been lying to them, manipulating them." "I believe you," Sarah said calmly. "But we need more than just belief. You've done the right thing by gathering evidence, but we need to be strategic. If you can prove that Emily's actions are harmful to the girls, that she's been actively deceiving them and using them to cover up her affair, you've got a chance to get custody." The word custody hit me like a ton of bricks. That's what this was coming down to, my daughters. It wasn't just about proving Emily wrong. It was about making sure she didn't take them away from me. "Do you have proof that she's been taking them to see him without your knowledge?" Sarah asked. "I have texts, emails, reservations, photos, everything," I replied. "Good, that's a start. But you need to get the girls on your side, too. Don't confront them about it directly. Don't put them in the middle of your fight with Emily. But show them that you're there for them, that you're the stable parent. You need to rebuild that bond before she turns them completely against you." I thanked her, set up a follow-up meeting, and hung up. Sarah's words stuck with me. Don't put the girls in the middle. It was good advice, but harder than it sounded. Emily had already dragged them into her mess, and now I had to be the one to pull them back out. Later that evening, I put my plan into action. Emily was out, probably with Daniel again, so I had the house to myself with Emma and Chloe. We ordered pizza, watched movies, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I was just there. Not distracted, not thinking about work or Emily or anything else. just present with my daughters. As we sat on the couch, Emma leaned her head on my shoulder. Dad, can we go to the park tomorrow? Just the three of us. That question hit me harder than anything Emily had said. It was such a small thing, but it felt like a lifeline. Emma didn't want Daniel. She wanted me. Chloe, sitting on the other side, nodded eagerly. Yeah, just us. Like we used to. I smiled, fighting back the wave of emotion that threatened to choke me. Of course, just us. That night, I tucked them into bed, kissed them goodnight, and stood in the hallway for a long time, thinking. Emily might have gotten close to them with her lies, but I wasn't going to let her rewrite our family's story. I had a chance, and I was going to take it. When Emily came home, I was waiting for her. She looked surprised to see me sitting at the kitchen table, a glass of water in front of me, the stack of printed evidence hidden away for now. She paused in the doorway, her eyes narrowing slightly, trying to read me. Long night? I asked casually. She shrugged. Just catching up with some friends. Right? I nodded, letting the lie hang in the air between us. I didn't press her. I didn't need to, not yet. I think we need to have a real talk, I said, my voice calm, controlled. About the girls. About where this is going. She sighed, walking over to the counter to pour herself a glass of wine. Mark, we've been over this. I don't want to keep having the same argument. We won't, I replied, leaning back in my chair. Because next time we talk, it'll be with lawyers. This isn't going to end the way you think it is, Emily. She turned slowly, her eyes flashing with something between fear and defiance. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I know everything, I said, my voice dropping lower. I know about you, about Daniel, and about what you've been doing with the girls. She froze, her glass of wine halfway to her lips. I'm done playing your game, Emily, I continued. You've lied, you've cheated, and you've dragged our daughters into it. You think you're in control? You're not. Not anymore. Her hand trembled slightly as she set the glass down. You wouldn't. I stood up, locking eyes with her. Try me. Her face twisted into a mask of fury, but beneath it, I could see the cracks. She wasn't as confident as she'd been at the restaurant. She knew now that I wasn't backing down. You have no idea what you're starting, Mark, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. No, I said, stepping closer. I know exactly what I'm finishing. The next morning felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air, the kind that crackles before a storm. Emily didn't say a word to me when she woke up. She moved around the kitchen with cold efficiency, pretending I wasn't there. Her usual morning chatter with the girls was muted, and even Emma and Chloe seemed to sense something was wrong. I wasn't going to let her silence shake me. I had made my move, and now I was waiting for her to react. She thought she could manipulate this situation like she'd done so many times before, but this time I was prepared. I was already 2 steps ahead of her. As I watched the girls eat breakfast, their innocent smiles lighting up the room, I felt the weight of what was coming next. I didn't want to destroy their world, but Emily had left me no choice. If I didn't fight back, she would keep pulling them deeper into her twisted web of lies. Couldn't allow that. I wouldn't. When Emily dropped the girls off at school, I sat down at the dining room table and called Sarah, my lawyer. I filled her in on what had happened the night before, the threat I'd made, and the coldness that had settled between us like a wall. Good, Sarah said, her voice sharp and focused. You need to stay strong. Don't let her intimidate you, and don't lose your temper. She's gonna try to push you into a reaction that she can use against you in court. Keep everything documented, and don't give her any ammunition. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. What's the next step? You said you've got solid evidence, emails, texts, proof that she's been taking the girls to see her lover without your knowledge. That's a strong starting point. We're going to file for temporary custody. If we can show the court that she's been putting the children in a compromising situation, you'll have a good chance of getting them out of her care, at least for now. My stomach tightened at the thought. Temporary custody. That meant the girls would be with me full-time, and Emily would be the one fighting to see them. Part of me wanted that, needed that, because I couldn't stand the idea of her manipulating them any longer. But the other part of me, the part that still remembered the good years, felt the weight of what this would mean for them. It wasn't just about me and Emily anymore. It never had been. Mark, Sarah's voice pulled me back to reality. I know this is hard, but you need to be clear about what's at stake. If you don't act now, she'll keep using the girls. She's already set them up to view this man as some kind of father figure. The longer this goes on, the harder it will be to undo. I exhaled slowly, feeling the gravity of her words sink in. She was right. Emily had already blurred the lines between our family and her affair. If I let her keep doing that, my daughters would be caught in a confusing, toxic situation that could warp their sense of reality. I couldn't let that happen. I had to be the stable parent, the one who pulled them back from the chaos Emily had created. After hanging up with Sarah, I knew the next step was going to be the hardest. Confronting Emily hadn't been enough. Now, I needed to involve the girls, but I had to be careful. Sarah had warned me not to force them into the middle of the conflict, but I couldn't leave them in the dark either. They needed to know the truth, or at least enough of it to understand why things were about to change. That evening, after Emily had gone to yoga, a laughable lie at this point, I sat Emma and Chloe down in the living room. They looked at me wide-eyed, sensing something serious in my tone. "Hey," I began softly, trying to ease into it. "I want to talk to you girls about something important. You know I love you, right?" They both nodded, their little faces full of trust, and that nearly broke me. I had to protect that trust, even if it meant shattering their world for a little while. "I know you've been spending a lot of time with Uncle Daniel," I said, forcing myself to keep my voice calm and even. I saw the flicker of recognition in their eyes. "And I know that Mommy has told you he's a friend." They exchanged glances, unsure of where I was going with this. Chloe, the younger one, shifted uncomfortably on the couch, while Emma just watched me with that quiet, thoughtful expression she always had when she knew something wasn't quite right. "The thing is," I continued, choosing my words carefully, "Uncle Daniel isn't just a friend of Mommy's. He's someone that Mommy has been spending a lot of time with. More time than she's been spending with me." Chloe's brow furrowed, her innocence protecting her from fully understanding what I was saying. But Emma's eyes narrowed just a little. She was smart, always picking up on the things adults tried to hide. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice a little more hesitant. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Mommy and I haven't been getting along for a while, and she's been seeing Uncle Daniel in a way that isn't fair to our family. She's been telling you one thing, but something else is going on. I want you to know that whatever happens next, I love you both more than anything. That's never going to change." Emma stared at me, and for a moment, I could see her processing, trying to make sense of what I was saying. Chloe, still confused, leaned against her sister, looking for reassurance. "So, you and Mommy aren't happy?" Emma asked, her voice small but direct. I sighed. "No, honey, we're not, and I don't know if we're going to be able to fix it. But I want to make sure that you and Chloe are okay. That's what matters to me." Emma's eyes softened, and she nodded slowly. Chloe, still too young to fully grasp it, just hugged her sister tighter. I could see the confusion and hurt swirling in Emma's eyes, but she didn't cry. She was too strong for that, too much like me. "Does this mean we won't see Mommy as much?" Emma finally asked, her voice breaking just a little. I hesitated. I didn't want to lie to her, but I also didn't want to dump the full weight of what was coming next on her shoulders. "Things might change for a while, but we'll figure it out. Okay? No matter what happens, you're going to be with someone who loves you." Chloe's lip trembled, and she whispered, "Are you going away, Daddy?" Her words cut through me like a knife. I shook my head, pulling her into my arms. "No, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to be right here with you." As I hugged Chloe, Emma leaned in too, and for a moment we just sat there. Me and my girls huddled together in the living room. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I would fight for them, for their safety and peace of mind. When Emily came home that night, I could tell she felt the shift. The girls weren't as chatty with her, and I didn't say a word. She glanced at me, but I gave her nothing. No anger, no frustration, just silence. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready for whatever came next. The next morning, I met Sarah at her office. We filed the paperwork for temporary custody. The evidence was clear, and Sarah assured me that I had a strong case. But it would still be a fight. Emily wasn't going to let this go easily. When I returned home, Emily was waiting for me. She must have sensed something was coming because she was pacing the living room, arms crossed, her face set in that defiant expression I knew so well. "Where were you?" she asked, her voice sharp. I set my keys down on the table and looked her dead in the eye. "I was with my lawyer." Her face paled. "You're what?" I didn't blink. "I filed for custody, Emily. Temporary custody of the girls. I have all the evidence I need. You're not going to drag them through your mess any longer." Her mouth opened in shock, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You wouldn't dare." "I already did." My voice was calm, deadly calm. "You've been using them, lying to them, manipulating them. It stops now." She stared at me, fury flashing across her face, but I didn't back down. This was it, the beginning of the end. "You can't win this, Mark," she spat, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't know what you're getting into." I took a deep breath, standing my ground. "I know exactly what I'm getting into, and I'm not going to stop until I get them out of your mess." For the first time in this whole ordeal, Emily looked scared. Real fear flickered in her eyes. She knew now this wasn't a game anymore. The battle for our daughters had just begun, and I was in it to win. Emily stood there, frozen, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She had always been the one who controlled the narrative, the one who spun stories and made excuses, bending the truth to fit her version of reality. But now I'd taken that control from her. For the first time, she was on the defensive. "You filed for custody?" Her voice was low, venomous. "You think you can just take them away from me?" I didn't flinch. "You took them away from me the moment you brought Daniel into their lives. The moment you made them lie for you, drag them into your affair. You've been destroying our family for months, and I'm done letting you get away with it." Her face twisted in anger, but I could see the fear lurking behind her eyes. She knew I had her cornered. But Emily wasn't the type to back down easily. No, she was going to fight dirty. She always did. "You really think a court is going to side with you?" she sneered, stepping closer. "You've been a distant father, Mark. You work all the time, you're hardly ever around. I've been the one raising them, taking care of them, keeping this family together. And now you're going to act like the hero." I clenched my fists, the anger surging through me. I wanted to yell, to throw everything she'd done in her face, but I couldn't afford to lose control. Not now. I had to stay calm, stay focused, and hit her where it hurt the most, with the truth. "You haven't been raising them, Emily," I said coldly. "You've been using them. You brought a stranger into their lives, someone they shouldn't even know, and you let him act like he's part of this family. You made them lie for you, and that's not just wrong. It's cruel." She flinched just barely, but I saw it. I was getting through to her. "I've got proof," I continued, my voice steady. "Every text, every email, every photo. The court's going to see everything. And they're going to know that you've been putting our daughters in the middle of your affair. You've been playing house with another man while pretending nothing was wrong. That's not the behavior of a fit mother." Her lips trembled, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing again. "You think you're going to win because you have some texts? You think that's enough?" She shook her head, her voice laced with disdain. "Mark, you don't know how this works. I've been their primary caregiver. They need me. They need stability," I corrected. "And they're not getting that from you. Not when you're dragging them into your lies." Emily's eyes flashed with rage, and she took a step closer, her voice low and dangerous. "You're going to regret this. You're going to lose, and when you do, I'm going to make sure you never see them again." There it was, the real Emily, the woman who would do anything to win, who saw this as a battle of wills, not a fight for our daughter's well-being. But I wasn't afraid of her anymore, not after everything she'd done. "You're underestimating me," I said, holding her gaze. "I'm not the man you can push around anymore. You've already lost, you just don't see it yet." She glared at me, her chest rising and falling with barely controlled anger. "This isn't over," she hissed. And then she stormed out of the room, leaving me standing there, the weight of our conversation settling over me like a heavy cloud. But I wasn't shaken. I wasn't scared. I had expected this, the threats, the anger, the attempt to twist everything around on me. But I knew the truth. and soon so would everyone else. The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. I worked closely with Sarah, gathering every piece of evidence I had. Emily had underestimated me, assuming I wouldn't be ready for this kind of fight. But I was ready, and I had more than just the texts and emails. I had my daughter's trust. I spent every moment I could with Emma and Chloe, making sure they knew I was there for them, that I wasn't going anywhere. They were still confused, still trying to make sense of everything, but they were resilient. I could see it in the way they looked at me, especially Emma. She knew something was wrong, but she also knew that I wasn't going to leave them. One evening, Emma came into my office, her small face serious as she stood in the doorway. "Dad," she said quietly, "are you and Mommy going to stop fighting?" I sighed, setting aside the paperwork I'd been reviewing. "Come here, sweetheart," I said, patting the chair next to me. She walked over and sat down, her legs swinging slightly, her eyes full of questions. "Things are going to be different," I said gently, trying to explain it in a way she could understand. "But it's not because of you. You and Chloe are the most important thing in the world to me. And no matter what happens between me and Mommy, that's never going to change." Emma looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "Is it because of Uncle Daniel?" My heart dropped. I wasn't sure how much she knew or how much Emily had told her, but hearing his name from my daughter's mouth was like a punch to the gut. "Uncle Daniel. He's part of why Mommy and I aren't getting along," I said carefully. "But what you need to know is that this is between the grown-ups. You and Chloe shouldn't have to worry about that. You just need to know that I love you, and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you're okay." She nodded slowly, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She wasn't a little kid anymore. She understood more than I wanted her to. "Dad," she said after a long pause, "I don't want things to be different. I just want us to be together." Her words broke my heart. I pulled her into a hug, feeling the weight of everything we'd lost, everything that had been taken from us because of Emily's betrayal. "I know, sweetie," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. "I know." When I tucked the girls into bed that night, I felt a renewed sense of determination. I wasn't just fighting for custody. I was fighting to keep my family intact, to protect Emma and Chloe from the fallout of Emily's selfishness. A few days later, the papers were officially served. Emily wasn't expecting it to happen so quickly, and when she saw the envelope on the kitchen counter, her face went pale. She glanced at me, her eyes filled with cold fury. "You think you're so smart," she muttered, ripping open the envelope. "You think you can just take them from me." "I'm doing what's best for them," I said simply, watching as she skimmed the documents. Her face twisted with anger as she realized what it meant. The custody hearing was set. The evidence was laid out. There was no escaping it now. "You're going to regret this," she said through clenched teeth, her voice shaking with rage. "I swear, Mark, you're going to regret this." I met her gaze, unflinching. "No, Emily, you are." She threw the papers down on the counter and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. But this time I wasn't rattled. The storm was here, but I was ready. The hearing was set for the following week, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy. Emily was going to fight, and she was going to fight dirty. But I had something she didn't, a clear conscience. I wasn't the one who had lied, cheated, and dragged our daughters into the mess. I was ready to face her, ready to protect my girls from the chaos she had created. No matter what Emily tried to throw at me, I wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The battle for my daughters was just beginning. But this time, I wasn't playing by Emily's rules. The morning of the custody hearing arrived, and the tension in the house was thick, almost suffocating. Emily and I hadn't spoken much since the papers had been served. Every interaction had been clipped, cold. The girls sensed the distance between us, but I tried to keep things as normal as possible for them, even though nothing about our situation was normal anymore. I woke up early, got dressed in my best suit, and stood in front of the mirror for longer than I needed to. I wasn't nervous, no, it was something else. A mixture of exhaustion, anticipation, and the weight of knowing that this day was going to change everything. I looked at my reflection, at the man I had become through all of this. I had always thought of myself as calm, rational, but now I was someone with a fire burning inside. I was ready to fight for my daughters, to protect them from the chaos Emily had created. I was about to head downstairs when I heard a knock on the door. It was Emma. She was standing there in her pajamas, looking up at me with those big, curious eyes. "Where are you going, Dad?" I smiled, kneeling down to her level. "I've got a meeting today, sweetheart, but I'll be back soon. Okay?" She furrowed her brow, the gears turning in her head. "Is it about the thing with Mommy?" I paused, my heart heavy. "Yeah, it is." She looked down at her feet, quiet for a moment, then asked softly, "Are we going to be okay?" I pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. "Of course we are," I whispered. "No matter what happens, I'm going to make sure you and Chloe are okay." She didn't say anything else, but she hugged me back, and in that moment, I felt more determined than ever. The drive to the courthouse was a blur. Sarah had prepped me for everything: what to expect, what to say, how to handle Emily's inevitable attacks. But nothing could fully prepare me for walking into that courtroom, knowing that the future of my family was hanging in the balance. Emily was already there when I arrived, sitting with her lawyer. She didn't look at me, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. She was dressed impeccably, her face a mask of calm, but I knew her too well. Beneath that exterior, she was furious. She was going to fight me tooth and nail, and she would do whatever it took to win. But I wasn't backing down. Not today. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom, waiting for the judge to arrive. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look at her. The air felt thick with unspoken accusations, and I could feel Emily's eyes burning into me, trying to rattle me. But I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. When the judge finally entered, the room fell silent. He was an older man, with a stern expression that made it clear this wasn't going to be easy. He looked at us both, his gaze piercing, as if he could see straight through the layers of deceit and pain that had built up between us. Emily's lawyer started first, painting her as the devoted mother who had been the primary caregiver, the one who had held the family together while I had been too busy with work. It was the narrative I expected. They played up her role as the ever-present parent, the one who had always been there for the girls, while subtly casting me as the distant father, too wrapped up in my career to notice what was happening at home. I sat there, stone-faced, listening as they twisted the truth, making it sound like I had been absent, neglectful. Emily played her part perfectly. Tears in her eyes, her voice trembling just enough to seem vulnerable. It was a performance, but a damn good one. I could see the judge listening carefully, and I knew we were in for a fight. When it was my turn, Sarah was brilliant. She laid out every piece of evidence we had: the texts, the emails, the proof that Emily had been taking the girls to see Daniel without my knowledge. She didn't hold back. Every ugly truth about Emily's affair was laid bare for the court to see. And then, she made the most important point of all. Emily had involved the girls in her deception. She had exposed them to a relationship they didn't understand, made them complicit in her lies, and used them as pawns in her affair. As Sarah spoke, I glanced over at Emily. For the first time, I saw her mask slip. Her face tightened, her hands gripping the edge of the table. She knew what was coming, and she knew it wasn't good. When I took the stand, I was calm, clear. I talked about my love for Emma and Chloe, about how I had been blindsided by Emily's affair, and how it had shattered our family. But I made it clear that this wasn't just about her cheating, it was about the impact it had on our daughters. They had been caught in the middle of something they didn't understand, something that had the potential to damage them in ways they couldn't even grasp yet. "I don't want to take them away from their mother," I said, my voice steady. "But I want to protect them. They deserve stability. They deserve honesty. And right now, they're not getting that from Emily." The room was silent when I finished. The judge leaned back in his chair, considering everything he had heard. I couldn't read his expression, but I hoped that our case had been strong enough, that the truth was enough to tip the scales in my favor. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the judge spoke. "This is a difficult case," he said, his voice measured. "But my primary concern is the well-being of the children. It's clear that there have been mistakes made by both parents. However, the evidence presented shows a pattern of behavior by the mother that raises concerns about her judgment regarding the involvement of the children in her extramarital relationship." My heart pounded in my chest as the judge continued. "In light of this, I am granting temporary custody to the father, with supervised visitation for the mother. Emily gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. I could feel her shock and fury from across the room, but I didn't look at her. Couldn't. The weight of what had just happened was too much. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. Not really. Felt like survival. The judge finalized the details, and just like that, it was over. Emily stormed out of the courtroom before I could even process what had happened, her lawyer trailing behind her, trying to calm her down. But I didn't follow. Couldn't. My mind was spinning, the reality of what this meant slowly sinking in. I had custody of Emma and Chloe. They were mine, safe from the chaos Emily had dragged them into. But the fight wasn't over. This was only temporary, and I knew Emily wouldn't stop. She'd come back harder, angrier, more determined to win. But for now, I had what mattered most, my daughters. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight of the battle lifted, replaced by a deep, unwavering resolve. I wasn't going to let Emily manipulate them again. I wasn't going to let her tear our family apart any more than she already had. I picked the girls up from school that afternoon. They had no idea what had happened, no idea how close they had come to being torn between two worlds. But as they ran toward me, their faces lighting up with smiles, I knew I had done the right thing. I knelt down, wrapping them both in a hug, holding them close, feeling the warmth of their trust. We were going to be okay. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was still full of challenges. But we were together, and that was enough. As we drove home, Chloe chattered happily in the back seat, while Emma quietly watched the world pass by through the window. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror, catching her eye for a moment. She smiled, a small, knowing smile. It was the kind of smile that told me she understood more than I realized. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled back, knowing that whatever happened next, we were ready for it. We had survived the storm, and now it was time to rebuild.